a introduction to the Greeks and get us all thinking about what we already know about them, and then I'm splitting the creation myth into two parts. There's just so much in it, so I'm splitting that into two parts. So yeah, welcome to one of the great Western mythologies. And welcome to this next stage in Cessa's journey, where we do, as I've said, enter the world of the Greek mythology, which I think is a tradition as familiar as it is complex. And while we last 2 weeks have explored the Hebrew and the Babylonian, now we're going to step into stories which I think many of us kind of feel we know. So perhaps not as deeply as we think we know them. So what Greek mythology offers is not just tales of creation, but also destruction, of great power and downfall, and of the cycles that binds both gods and humans. And what we will be doing this evening is covering 3 generations, which stretch from the primordial first order to the second order, which was the Titans, and finally the relatively familiar Olympians. And just to give you a kind of heads up, in some ways, what we would describe this group as is a dysfunctional family. Because they behave in ways that are problematic, and then they seem to pass on the trauma and the patterns from one generation to the other. It's as if trauma is indeed intergenerational. So what about familiarity? We know the Greeks, and let's just take Odysseus. It's a term in everyday usage, the term Odyssey for a journey. In an Irish context, the Odyssey was the basis for Joyce's great epic Ulysses. We also know words like echo and panic, panic from the god Pan. Even the word psychology is about psyche, which is soul, and logos, which is study. We know about the Furies and the Fates. We might even have visited Athena's temple in Athens, the Acropolis. We might have seen a great Greek tragedy, Oedipus Rex, or if we're Freudians, be very familiar with the Oedipus complex. Even terms like democracy, which is demos, people, and kratos, power, which we use every day. And utopia, eu means not, and topos means place. They're fully part of our lives. And for those of us who live in Europe, we actually live in a continent named after Europa, who was a Phoenician princess. So while we do know the Greeks, perhaps ironically at the same time, they are less familiar, certainly, than they once used to be, because we tend to know the stories and myths in fragments. They were once part of the education of the elite schools, but certainly in Western Europe. And in Ireland, the classics were part of the hedge school tradition during the penal times, where the hedge school teachers, this is literally teaching outside because they weren't allowed to teach, were said to have many of the great classic books in their bags. Anyway, before diving in, I just want to pause and say a little bit about how the Greeks see their myths and what did these stories mean to them, not just in terms of temples and tragedies, but in the quiet personal moments of everyday life. And there's a brilliant book and a brilliant quote in it by a writer, great Italian, Roberto Calasso, in his book, The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony. And he offers a terrific insight. He says, whenever their lives were set aflame through desire or suffering, or even reflection, the Homeric heroes knew a god was at work. powerful thought. Whenever their lives were set aflame, the Homeric heroes knew that a god was at work. And carrying on, Colossus says, no psychology since has ever gone beyond this. All we have done is invent for those powers that act upon us longer, more awkward names, which are less effective, less closely aligned to the pattern of our experience, whether that be pleasure or terror. So just to illustrate this, we all know the feeling of falling in love, and what a Greek, within Greek culture, what they'd say is Aphrodite is in me. So for those forces that move us, what they would be saying is a God is in me. It's a sort of lived reality for those feelings, those emotions, those passions, these archetypes and these great figures of Greek myth are an incredibly rich description of internal forces and indeed external forces, because the myths are multivalent. They can work within us or on us from outside. They can work at an intrapersonal, interpersonal, and societal, cosmic level. Myths are multivalent. So what this essentially means is that this is a language that captures and describes the forces out there that are greater than us, shaping our emotions in actions and ways we don't fully understand and don't fully control. And so, exactly as Colasso says, in a way, these myths offer an early psychology, a language to describe powerful inner experiences long before the more abstracted language that academia and science tends to use. So I just want to say a little bit about these Greek myths and archetypes in my own life, because for 25 years I was working with them. And when we started the business, which was on global branding, we had 4 very bright classicists, and I asked them to look at the narrative structures of the best-selling films for Polygram Europe, a big film company. And they took the top 5 grossing films of each decade, going right back to the 1960s, and they analyzed the underlying plot structure. And what they found is that every single one of those films uses the structure of 6 Greek myths. So it's almost as if these mythic and narrative structures capture the operating system of Western culture, of culture generally. They're an operating system that describes in narrative those forces that act upon us and shape us. I'm not particularly proud of this, except we did a lot of work with Unilever that had 1,800 global brands, and we had the fastest growing brand in the fastest growing category, which was toilet cleaning, household cleaning, with Big Dom. And Big Dom, and the archetype was Hercules or Heracles, the strongest man in the world. In film, it was Clint Eastwood in Dirty Harry. And the agency, going back to Hercules, came up with a brilliant campaign from the perspective of Germ World, where they told the story from the perspective of the germs and all the nasty things they were going to do to you. Now, what that did was it was unapologetically based on frightening people. And, with that kind of background, it was a good training to, in a way, see what was going on, particularly in 2015 and 2016, where the political campaigning had very little to do with policies, but had an awful lot to do with the use of these deep cultural myths. And one of the things I used to say, or still do, was the guy that was best at what I did professionally was the guy that got into the White House that year, because he used the structure of American cultural myths, uh, things like rot at the top, um, we're about to be invaded, poor boy makes good, and various other mythic structures were explicitly and brilliantly used. Uh, so this stuff works. Hollywood and politics these days has huge recourse to these underlying deep mythic structures. And that's what we did. We used to help brands define what archetype they were. And one of the things that was quite reassuring was there were some absolutely brilliant and very powerful female archetypes like Circe, Aphrodite, Demeter, Penelope, that we used to work, Athena, Thetis, Themis, that we used to work with to give a rich range of very powerful female characters. And one of the ironies tonight is we're going to find out that even though this is a mythology that in many ways presents some of the most inspiring female archetypes of any mythology, you will find that the way women are presented and treated in these stories tonight somewhat different. Now, just a word of advice before we get into tonight. In some ways, what we've got is a extraordinary lexicon of descriptions and language that it's no surprise at all that the psychoanalysis, people like Freud and Jung had huge recourse to this stuff, because in a way they're picking up what Calasso's saying. This is an extraordinary psychology. But one of the dangers in what I'm covering tonight is that don't get too hung up on the names, because you'll just end up in a spin. You do not have to remember them all. I'll just return to the ones that you do. However, if you want to know the muses because you're interested in different types of creativity, go back to them, because there's a brilliant description of, I think, 6 or 7 different muses, all of whom were the goddess of a different type of creativity. In terms of mental illness, some of the children of Nyx and Erebus give you a great overview of different types of dark emotions, because the mum and dad were of the dark. So in a way, one of the great tragedies of the shift from polytheism to monotheism is an incredibly rich language of the psychology and the soul was lost, because we then end up with a great abstraction of God, with it just being a big fat signifier with multiple signifieds. The connection between the signifier and the signified is whatever you want to make of it, to use a bit of semiotic language. But in the Greeks, there was an incredible overview worked out, because they had access to writing it down. And that's one of the differences between Greek and Irish myth, is they didn't have writing, so it's less worked out, less tidy, whereas the Greek stuff is in many ways brilliantly worked out, albeit that you're going to have some questions, I would say, at the end of today. But anyway, into small groups for 10 minutes and talk about your relationship to Greek myth. What do you know